Hey pilots, welcome to the F-16 build. In this video I'll be building the pusher version as I've recently been doing EDF, so we'll make a wee change, do the pusher version. Also apologies in advance as I don't follow the build guide to the T. I have made a couple of mistakes, but that's the joys of scratch building and we'll go over those when we come to them. So the first step is to epoxy the carbon spars into the wing, and we'll also be fitting the ailerons at the same time. So here we are taping up the best side of the wing plate just so that we're holding the epoxy in place. Getting the ailerons, putting them into position and just marking up. What I've done here is I've marked the centre position, then I think it was 15mm from the outer edges, just so that when I go to put in the linkages, the 3D printed linkages, I'm trying to get them straight. Do the same on the opposite side, and then I'm using a 3mm piece of Depron just to mark the centre line, and then using a sharp blade trimming away a 45-degree bevel. So you do the same on both sides, and then I'm using the linkages itself just to mark out where they're going to go, so that I can cut that slot to fix them with epoxy. I actually measured them and just to be sure that I wasn't cutting too much, I will cut on the lines itself, which will give me a slight gap to allow for the epoxy going in and not spilling out too much, and hopefully not having too big a space in between. So as I've marked them up, cutting them out, however, what I've done here is I'm cutting the aileron off from the wing plate itself. It's actually better to cut them in position, that way you're absolutely sure that the cuts are in the right line. So as you can see here, offering them up, seeing how it fits, and it looks fantastic on this side. However, you flip it over, that side fitted pretty well, and this side it just looked off. So that is the top side. So I was a wee bit confused as to how it got to that. So like I say, if you're cutting them using the hinges, what I would tend to do is offer them up to each other and then cut this slice. So here I've tried the hinges just to make sure they fit pretty well. Had a wee trim up, put the tape on the underside and then flip it over so that we're ready to apply the epoxy. Here I'm using a lower tack tape than I have used before, and just remove the foam for where your carbon spar is going to be. Using some additional tape, this is actually the tacky stuff, and just so that any additional epoxy on the outside will just be caught with the tape, and it will give you a nice clean finish. So here I'm using the 20-minute epoxy. There's 19 grams, and also adding some micro balloons as well just to bulk it out so that we're not putting too much epoxy in. And just be sure to give it a good stir. You can see it actually lumping up together, and I think the micro balloons certainly help you notice how well it's actually mixed together. And obviously it's a bit lighter. So when it comes to the aileron hinges, just be careful that, as you can see here, I'm just placing a small amount of epoxy on the outer edges, not in the seam line where the join line. Do the same on both sides, and then start applying some to the slot where you fit your carbon spars. I've already test fitted them just to make sure that they're a nice fit. Smoothing it out, make sure there's good amount in there. Any extra will come out, and then we can clean it up with a scrap piece of foam. Putting the carbon spars into position, and just here I lifted it up. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just left it in there, because when we turn the wing over, when it's set, it actually pushed some of the epoxy down underneath the tape and in between the wing plate and the tape itself. So we're using the additional foam on the additional tape, on the top. You can see it's spread over with a scrap piece of foam just to smoothen it out, get a nice clean finish. Getting the linkages, putting these in place, and then what we'll do is we'll just allow it to cure. A couple of batteries just to add a wee bit of weight, make sure it's as flat as possible to the build surface. Once you've given it the cure time, flip it over and remove the tape. Actually worked out quite well, surprisingly. So a nice finish there. What I'm doing is just a slight trim of the ailerons, just so there's maybe a millimetre or two, just so there's nice free movement. And then by the time I add loads of paint to it, it will certainly thicken up. So we just trim it off a wee bit. So here we are with the former fuselage former. A wee bit of tape on it, and just apply a small amount of Yoo-hoo pour. Offer it up just so there's a wee bit of tack on both sides. And I'm just putting the tape on it just to hold it in position. Lay it against a piece of 6mm Depron and allow it to cure. Then fuselage 1 and fuselage 2 mounts. So just removing the extra slots here and a wee test fit for the fuselage 2 piece, the wee former. Fits quite well, and fuselage 1 is also. Apply a small amount of Yoo-hoo pour, or whatever glue it is that you actually use. I need to try the foam tack, see how that works out. So offering them into position just so there's a bit of glue on both contact surfaces. Then I've actually got bulkhead 3 there, just offering a wee bit up, putting it into position just so that when I'm giving it the air time to dry, it'll dry pretty quick. So there's former 1 in place, and then again former 2. So the next step, as I was saying, is the fuselage 3 and the EDF bulkheads or the jigs. However, I'm using a pusher in this model, so there's fuselage number 3 in place, and rather than cutting out the jigs, I was in two minds whether to do the EDF or the pusher. I had it all printed and cut out and decided, well, we'll just go with the pusher. So rather than cutting out the jigs, I'm just using the EDF mounts. I do appreciate and be careful that they can be quite flimsy, so just be mindful of when you're offering it up here. So on the exhaust bulkhead, just putting a wee spot of glue, just giving it time to air dry a bit. I'm using these modelling pins just to hold it in place. I actually find that they can be quite useful. Obviously, I'm kind of impatient at times, so anything to help speed it along, I'm happy with that. So the exhaust bulkhead, we put a wee bit of glue on it, gave it that air time so that now that I offer it up, it'll stick pretty well, pretty quick. Also using a wee couple of modelling pins just to hold it in a position because, like I say, it is quite flimsy. Now on the fuselage sides, be careful and do follow the guide here. So I have the two of them, offering them up, and where I made the mistake is I just put it up to test fit as I always do. I'm using a pen just to mark on the wing plate where I'm about to apply the glue, so that I'm not putting on too much and we're getting it in the right position. So there's one side, quite happy with that, onto the bulkheads, and then along the wing plate itself. And obviously be careful not to glue the EDF bulkheads there, or whether it's the jigs that you actually use. So offering it up so that the Yoo-hoo goes onto both sides, allow it time to air dry. And then here I am, quite eager to get on with the build and doing the same with the opposite side. However, in the build guide itself, it will ask you to just put on one side, so that when it comes to the next step, be it the forward fuselage tops and the canopy supports, it's a lot easier to actually put in place. So just be careful, and I'd suggest you follow the build guide in this instance. So here I am with my modelling pins, turning the fuselage into a pin cushion resemblance, and moving on to the supports. So as we do, just a small amount of Yoo-hoo offer up to both sides, so it's nice and tacky, and then slide it into position. If it was just the one side, it would be so much easier. The canopy supports is fine as it is, however, here I am trying to get the front piece in, which was a bit of an issue. I've actually cut out some of the footage with me flapping about trying to get it in place, but I managed to get it in there. And then again, using some modelling pins, just holding it into place. Like I say, if you follow the build guide itself, it'll ask you to put in one side. Once those are into position, then you follow up with the opposite side, which is certainly a lot easier than I made it out to be. So now that I've got the two PCs in place, again just offering up some modelling pins just to hold it into place. I made it worse than it actually should have been. And using a sharp blade, just trimming it up, because the front piece, there was a wee bit out. So here we are, the upper fuselage side and the forward fuselage upper. Well, as you know, I've already done the opposite side, but moving on to the former fuselage upper, because I didn't actually follow the guide, you can see it's just off shape, and by the looks of things it's a bit too big. So I'm using some hot glue just to secure it into place, because it wasn't as flat and flush as it would normally be. So on the top, just before we go into the next step, I'm just flattening out each side to try and get it as level as possible. You could use a sanding block, but I'm just using a sharp blade and just getting it as level to both sides, ready to accept a flat piece of Depron on the top, so that you've got a nice good contact surface when it comes to adding the glue. So off camera, I'm just eyeballing it, seeing how flat it is, and making sure it's as good as I can get it. There's a wee bit on the other side. Just taking as little off as possible. If I make any mistakes, it's not an issue. Obviously, we'll be filling it with some light putty. So onto the fuselage top, upper, the lower part, and the upper itself. So now that we've flattened it off, you can see right at the tip there, I've actually sanded it. It's not 100% perfect, but I'll get to that when it comes to fitting the canopy later on. So just had a wee look, offered it up, see that it was a nice even fit on the top. You know, we had trimmed it back a wee bit with the razor. Offering it up and giving it a wee squidge about to make sure that there's a good contact to glue on both sides. Once it's had a wee bit of time to air dry, makes it a bit more tackier as it is contact glue. Just at the back there, I'm just putting a couple of pins in just to be sure, and then lining it up to get it into place. And as you can see, the shadows there, it is a bit over, but again we'll trim that back and then sand it away. So the next part, I'll be using spray M77, give it a light dusting. I really love this when it comes to laminating PCs like that. On with the upper fuselage top, put it into place, and then just firm it down. Next step, so we go kind of back and forward, we kind of jump between a couple of steps here. As you can see, I've now got the iPad out and having a look through the build guide just to make sure I don't make any more mistakes. So flipping back and forward, the next part is to cut out the spaces for the elevator to fit the tubes. Now the guide asks for a steel rod. I didn't have any. What I use is an 8mm piece of carbon fibre tube, and which will accept a 6mm piece of, again, carbon fibre tube, which I use for the elevators and control surfaces. It fits pretty well. So using a ruler, I've just lined it up to make sure it's as level as can be, and then just trimming it away, careful not to cut through. Putting a wee bit of tape on the underside, just so that when I add some epoxy, I'm not going to be spilling out over the fuselage and things. Checking things, it looks pretty good. And what I'm doing here is I've measured the width of the sides there, and just taping it up to see how much of the carbon fibre tube I'm going to slice. I've also taken a small scrap piece of foam and just cut a wee 45-degree angle or so. I'm going to slide that underneath as well, just to make sure that, you know, we're not spilling the epoxy. I want a nice flat join right across it. So mixing up some epoxy, and as you can see, because of the tape and that extra wee bit of foam, I've got a good adhesion right along it. Making sure that the epoxy is not just on the bottom but on the sides as well. Slide through the 6mm carbon spar through the tubes, add some additional epoxy on the top, and in that way, with the 6mm tube through it, you're making sure it's as nice and level. So the next step is the formers. As you can see, we've set the elevator in position. I've sanded the back, the trailing edge of these formers here. However, around the sides I've not trimmed it away as much, as I'll be doing that when I come to sanding. So again, using the spray M77, light dusting, offer it up into place and then push it down. Again with the next part, a light spray dusting. It certainly sticks a lot quicker than if I was to use Yoo-Hoo Pour or something here. So checking out the build guide to see what the next steps are. Part 17 and part 18, I also made a wee mistake here again. As you can see there on part 18, I've actually cut out the hole. This is a template for part 19. So here we've put up part 17, that's in place. The extra bit that I cut out for fuselage number 19, as you can see, I'm scanning up and down on the iPad and I wasn't actually too sure what I'd done. So I take that piece, slide it back into where it should go and glued it in. Bit of spray M77, then offer that up and put it into place. Cut out the scrap with a scrap piece of foam, cut out number 19. I think where I went wrong, looking at the build guide, it looked actually quite longer than it actually is. So I think I got a wee bit confused there. It's going back to the elevator. Now that that's had time to set, checking the rod moves freely and slide out. There was a wee bit of epoxy on the end of it, so I just trimmed it up. Then we're going to set the rod into the elevators. So I've just put a wee bit of tape on it so I can measure it up and see that it comes to the end of the control surface. Slide that into position, giving probably about 10mm at the opposite end so that we can put the wee stopper on. And then a wee bit of tape just so that I can mark it up to see how, again, where it is I'm actually going to cut it. I've also printed a couple of control horns here, which I will be epoxying in place, and I'm just offering it up to the elevator itself and just trying to measure out how much foam I need to cut away. I don't want to cut away too much, but I want it nice and flat against the top of the surface so it doesn't look like it's sticking out. slide that into the 6mm rod, and again measure it up and just make sure it's a nice good fit. So as we do with the wing plate and the other control surfaces, a wee bit of epoxy, tape the opposite side and then slide some epoxy into position. Now I've not put the epoxy right to the edge. What I'll do is we're setting the carbon rods in place first, leaving maybe 10 mils ready for the control horn itself. So back to part 19, which we've fit, and the splitter pieces. So a wee bit yoo-hoo pour on the contact surfaces there where the first splitter piece is going to go in. Offer it up so that the glues on both of the contact surfaces, give it a wee bit of time to air dry, and slide it back into place. And then splitter number 2, again some some yoo-hoo on there, slide it about so that there's a nice even flat coating, and allow it to dry. Moving back to the elevators, now that the control rods, the carbon fibre tubes have set in place, just pull back the tape a wee bit and add a small amount of epoxy in there. Now you can see with the control horns itself, I've actually sawed a bit off the back so that when it goes onto the table it's nice and flat, and it's 90 degrees or as close to as possible, so that's going to be a nice even controls on both sides. It'll be glued in place, and then we'll use just a couple of millimeters of the control horn just to space it off the fuselage. So onto the two bottom pieces and the pusher mount itself. Just offered it up for a wee test fit. I've just marked there with a pen to show which sides will be tapering off with sanding. So now that it's sanded and tapered off, again spray M77, contact glue. We'll do both sides, a quick burst, and then we'll put that back into place. Offer it up to the fuselage, using the trailing edge as the measuring line, and moving it right along the wing plate itself, making sure it's nice and level and all the cuts already marked in there are in position and offered up nice and neat to each other. Same with the opposite side, starting at the trailing edge, working forward and just pushing it down so they've got nice contact. There was a wee bit of rise there with the 8mm tube, so it might be an idea just to give it a light sand with a tube, bit of sandpaper around the tube. So the pusher control surface, the mount, again a wee bit of spray M77 and stick the two pieces together nice and flush. So now that the elevators and control horns, the rods are all set, offer it up and slide it in to see how well it fits, and it was pretty good fit. I was really happy with that. There's a wee bit of epoxy there, so just using a blade just trimmed it back a wee bit. Again sliding it in and using the control horn, as you can see there's a couple of millimeters spacing from the fuselage itself. Then I've printed some end stops. You can use some drilled out prop adapters, but I've just taken the opportunity to use the printer and printed out some end stops here. So with a wee bit of hot glue, just securing them so they're in place. Sometimes I use CA glue as well, but I just used a wee bit of hot glue. So the next step is to fit the pusher mount and the ESC and start on the electric side of things. So I've already attached the motor to the prop adapter, connected up the ESC. I've got the propeller on, it's not secured, so what we're doing is just to see that the orientation is right. Give it a quick wee spin up, turns round, I can see which way the motor's turning and the pusher prop is moving in the right direction. So now that that's wired up and I'm happy that we're moving in the right propulsion, just setting it up against the exhaust bulkhead and just trimming it away. Quite happy with the fit. I think the tail is quite heavy. I should have extended the motor wires and moved the ESC a bit closer to the centre of gravity, so the tail will be a bit heavy on this. However, I can use a bigger battery to balance it out. As it's a prop pusher, I'm not really too bothered about the weight because it will be quite light compared to an EDF. So using some hot glue into the position where the motor mount goes, just hold it until a minute and a half, 2 minutes until the hot glue sets. Tidy up the wires a wee bit and then moving on to the servos. So I've already centered the servos, put the control arms on and the linkage stoppers in place as well. So a wee bit of glue in with the aileron servos. On the elevator servos, what I've actually did is trimmed it back just slightly closer, maybe 5-6 mils closer to the centre of the fuselage. That way the control arms for the servos are not on the outside of the fuselage. We want it to stay inside so that it doesn't get in the way of the control surfaces when it's moving back and forward. So again, as we do with the servos, just some Yoo-hoo pour, offer them into place. You can use hot glue or whatever glue it is you choose. I'm just using a bit of Yoo-hoo because inevitably I'll end up having to replace something if I break something. And by using Yoo-hoo, it tends to come out just a wee bit better than using hot glue. So quite happy with the position. As you can see there on the rear servos, the linkage stopper sits on the inside of the control surface itself. Just making up the push rods using a set of Z-bend pliers just to get the Z-bend there, and then just offer it up to the servo to see the distance you need and just cut it, put it into place. Unplugged the battery there because I wasn't actually, I didn't want to put any stress on the servos while I'm connecting the push rods. So now that we've got them all together, the elevator's done and moving on to the ailerons. If it was a aileron configuration, I do believe it will fly pretty well. There's good reports from others who've previously built this model, and running ailerons only would be fantastic. However, for the sake of the build video, we're using all control surfaces, and there will be a few different mixes for some crazy flying styles and see how it goes. So we've taped up the ailerons itself just to make sure they're nice and level. Attach the control rods and then tighten your linkage stoppers up just to get them as nice and flush as possible. I did actually try testing them there while the tape was still on. Next step is the lower side pieces and the 3mm splitter. Again, we'll come to that when it's on in time. So here we've got the lower side pieces. In true Fleming fashion, just gluing, sticking it down, getting onto it as quick as we can so that we can get to painting. Offered up some wee test fit to make sure it was nice and in place. So the first one, as you can see, I've already glued it, put it into place, but the second one, I'm realising that the rear servos just sit a wee bit proud, and I've actually trimmed it away on that side so that when we put it into place, it'll be nice and flush and flat against the belly itself. using a wee modelling pin, just holding it at the back. And then on the first one that, like I say, I just went straight on, I've actually pulled it off, realised that there's a wee, need to cut a wee recess in the back there. Stick that back down and it's fine. So as you can see, we've kind of missed the splitter, and I'm moving on to the belly panel itself. At first I was thinking, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. However, it actually worked out pretty well. So you can see the two mirrored sides there, and what I've done is offered up some glue to both panels, and then using the centerpiece, the belly panel itself, rubbing the glue against it, the two pieces against each other so that there's glue on both sides, and giving it a chance to air dry. Once it's air drying, because it's contact glue, it was actually fitting pretty well. Trying not to use the modelling pins here so that it doesn't end up like a pin cushion. And what I've also done is using a wee bit of hot glue, just a tiny wee bit of hot glue on the inside, and using a scrap piece of foam, just smearing it so that there's a thin application. You're breaking the surface tension of the hot glue, which tends to make it hold a wee bit better rather than just a big thick bead. And just to secure the bottom on the inside and the outside. So we're just test fitting it using the exhaust bulkhead as the marker point, and as you can see on the pusher version, the slots for it fitted pretty well. So here I've got the 3D printed intake in lightweight PLA. I think it's 2 walls, because my flying style, I'll end up crashing it, cracking it. Well, I might crash it as well. On the build guide, it's I asked you to cut away, I think it's 30mm. So what I've done, just on each surface, each side, mark that 30mm. Get the line in place, have it nice and flat and level as possible, and then just slowly run your blade through it. Just be careful when you're using sharp blades. Watch if your fingers underneath it. And trimming away the 30mm so that the intake fits pretty flush. And again with the side panels, trimming away 30mm there as well. And then I noticed the splitter. So the splitter piece is actually part of the plans. It comes out on a 3mm piece of Depron. However, I hadn't printed that one off. Again, just too keen and eager to get to putting the 6mm pieces of Depron together and actually building the jet. So what I've done is just marked it up, cut away the 30, and I'm trying to figure out how it is I'm going to make a splitter panel. As you can see there, it says glue the 3mm splitter piece in place. So just using a 3mm piece of Depron, just trimming it away. I think it was 12 centimeters by 14 if I remember, and using the intake as well as a bit of a guide. So once that's in place and tried out, offered up a wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour both sides, slide it about so there's a nice contact, and then just allow it to dry. So the next step is the belly panel, attaching that, and then eventually getting on to fitting the intake as well. So on the bottom panels, just offering up some Yoo-hoo pour on the contact surface, making sure that's all the way across. Now these are angled parts that have been trimmed so that when we put on the belly piece it fits pretty well. So now that we've offered it up, and sliding it about just so that the glue smudges about and there's a nice contact on both surfaces. On the tab there of the pusher mount, I've put a wee bit of Yoo-hoo on the sides. However, chose to use some hot glue, and as you can see there, I went too far. So using a wee scrap piece, just pushing it back up to where it needs to be on this side of the exhaust bulkhead. So pushing it up, now that it's had time to air dry, the glue was actually going off pretty quick and setting down pretty fast. On this side I wasn't too happy, so I was just careful, just trying to peel it back slowly and release the glue and then push it back down so that it was in position and I was happy with where it was. Then some glue with the intake, again giving that a wee chance to air dry. Then when you offer it up, it's nice and it sticks pretty quickly. So on the splitter piece, I'm just using, unfortunately you can't really see it on the camera, just using the angles of the intake and trimming away that square edge of the 6mm Depron where it goes onto the 3, and just slowly taking off slight pieces by pieces of foam, just thin shavings, and getting it to the nice shape that I'm looking for, and using the front of the intake as a guide as to where I want it. And as you can see there, we've trimmed it up a wee bit. The bottom's still to be done, but we've trimmed away that hard corners. Next step's the nose cone. Again, I've 3D printed the nose cone and the canopy. I printed the canopy just for the sake of marking up where it's actually going to go, so that when it comes to sanding, I'm not sanding too much back and we can get it nice and flat against the side panels and the top itself. So I've added some glue to the nose cone. As you can see there, there's a 3D printed one, and there's still a bit of trimming and sanding to do. So before we get to the sanding, trimming away as much of the foam as possible. And as the guide does, I've used a magnet at the back with a wee lip at the front for securing the canopy. In terms of the exhaust, I've 3D printed them, and the wingtips. Also 3D printed these as well. Now, instead of side winders, because of the paint scheme I was going for, I was sure it was the smoke tanks that I printed. So the next step is the upper fuselage sides. Now these are cut at an angle on the inside so that it fits pretty well against the fuselage. With a couple of test fits, I was quite happy with it. Then offered up some Yoo-hoo pour, put the two sides together and smudge it about so there's a nice thin application. Give it a wee bit of time to air dry, more than I actually did, but if you give it a wee bit more time to air dry, then it fits pretty well and sticks down pretty good. So again, using the tail piece as the guide, attach that onto the vertical stabilizer. I've chosen to add a 1mm piece of carbon slot. I tend to thrash this about and get as much performance out of it as possible, and I thought probably best to put a wee bit of carbon spar in there as well, just to stiffen it up. So if I am inverted, it might not snap off just as quick as it normally would. So like we do with the wing panels, I'm just offering up some tape so it's nice. Certainly you want the vertical stabilizer to be nice and clean on both sides. So again, in with a wee bit of epoxy, and then put the 1mm carbon flat bar in place, using a scrap piece of foam, tidy it away. You see the excess foam, the excess epoxy there, so it should be nice and clean. Give it that 20 minutes to cure, and remove the tape, and we've got a stronger vertical stabilizer. There was a couple of wee spots, you can see it there. It's picking up the white parts. Just make sure you put in enough epoxy so that you're not having to go back over so much and fill in with a lightweight filler. So scrape it on and scrape as much of it off as possible. The less sanding to be done, the better. So installing the support sides, the optional fuel tanks didn't go with these. So what I've chosen to do again is the side supports. What I've done is I've sanded them and shaped them, but I'm putting a wee bit of Yoo-hoo on here so that when I put them together, there's a nice flat surface. And then what I'll do is I'll attach that to the vertical stabilizer itself. So when it comes to putting the epoxy onto it and securing it to the fuselage, I've actually got more off a contact surface for the epoxy, and then hopefully it'll be nice and straighter as well. So with the pre-mixed epoxy, just spray it quite liberally about, and you'll see at the trailing edge of the elevator that actually comes off the fuselage itself once it's shaped. As you can see, I've already done a wee bit of sanding. So offer it up into place, and using a scrap piece of foam, you know, make sure you've got plenty epoxy on here. You don't want to have not enough, but there's plenty on there. What I'll do is just use a wee modelling pin again and hold the front in place. As I've eyeballed it, and it looks as straight as possible, as vertical as I can get it. Once I've pinned it into place again, squeeze it down, and any excess epoxy that comes out, just clean it away with a scrap piece of foam. Like I was saying, the optional fuel tanks, I chose not to go for these. The Canopy looks fantastic. If you're doing builds, if you can't vac form them or plug them yourself, I strongly advise get in touch with Craig. His canopies are fantastic. So here we are, the F-16's built. It looks stunning. So thanks again, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. We've went over my mistakes, and please, use the build guide. It's certainly there for its purpose. Craig does a fantastic job designing these jets and spending the time to do the build guides as well. So just because I've done a build video to help you through the process, I do suggest follow the build guides and make sure you build to your style. Again, I hope this has helped you guys. Thanks if you've stayed this long. I've seen a few F-16 builds recently, and it really spurred me on to build this. So looking forward to the maiden, and looking forward to seeing all your builds as well. Thanks, pilots. Take care.